What's next? An actor telling Congress how to do its job? That's what she scoffed, just loud enough for the room to hear, just smug enough to sound like a joke. But the man walking through that door wasn't here for laughs. Denzel Washington wasn't carrying a script. He was carrying evidence. And he wasn't stepping into a scene. He was stepping into a system that had silenced too many for too long. They thought he came to perform. What they didn't know was that the truth had just entered the room, wearing a calm suit and a name they couldn't dismiss. And it all began the moment he walked into Congress. It wasn't the Oscars. There were no flashing lights, no red carpets, no tuxedos. Only hard marble floors, murmuring aides, and a hearing room drenched in silence so thick you could slice it with a subpoena. And yet, when Denzel Washington stepped through the chamber doors of the Rayburn building, heads turned as if a storm had entered the room. He wasn't there to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. He wasn't there to play a role. He was there, in the heart of Congress, to accuse the government, his government, of laundering pain into profit. Denzel stood not as an actor, but as a federal witness, voluntarily summoned by a bipartisan oversight committee investigating the largest public-private relief program in post-pandemic America. A program now tainted by whispers of offshore accounts, shell charities, and the silent disappearing of over $246 million. The kind of corruption that doesn't make headlines because it's protected by the people who own the ink. Across from him, seated with the confidence of a seasoned tactician, was Pam Bondi, blonde, sharp, with eyes like courtroom steel, and the unmistakable scent of political privilege. She leaned back in her chair, microphone hot, camera lights glowing just enough to highlight the irony about to leave her lips. She didn't even wait for protocol. She smirked, tilted her head slightly, and said into the mic for the world to hear, "So let me get this straight. A man who built his career pretending to be slaves, gangsters, and fallen heroes, now believes he's qualified to cross-examine the justice system? Is that what America has come to?" A few chuckles from the far-right flank. A few gasps from journalists who hadn't yet hit record. But Denzel didn't flinch, not even a blink. He'd seen this look before. On sets, in boardrooms, in back rooms where black brilliance was measured by how quiet it could remain. Bondi's voice cut through the chamber again, this time colder. "Mr. Washington, I respect your films, but we're not on a movie set. You don't get to write the ending here. The facts will speak for themselves, if you even brought any." Silence. But beneath the silence, something rumbled. Not in the floor, not in the seats, in the public conscience. Something stirred, something dangerous. Because America loves a villain it can name, but it fears a truth that sounds like prophecy. Denzel stepped forward, just one pace. He placed both hands on the witness stand, leaned in, not with aggression, but with the controlled grace of a man who'd spent a lifetime navigating rooms that weren't built for him. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I didn't come here for applause. I came here because when the lights go out, some of us still live in the dark, and I'm here to name the ones profiting from it." Bondi's smile faltered. "You say I played slaves?" "You're right. And the saddest part is, those roles still reflect reality. Not just because of skin color, but because of silence. Because too many people in power believe they can do whatever they want, as long as no one with a spotlight asks the wrong questions." The room shifted. You could feel it. A few aides looked at each other. The chair of the subcommittee coughed nervously. Somewhere in the corner, a young intern typed furiously. But Bondi? She stared, calculating, cold, because she knew what came next wasn't just a speech. It was a challenge. "I brought documents," Denzel continued. "Wire transfers, dated memos, internal emails, names. Not to destroy reputations, but to restore a little faith in what this chamber was supposed to stand for." And then he looked right at her, not with hate, not with fear, but with that piercing calm that made Bondi, for the first time in years, lose her footing. Not publicly, not visibly, but internally, that subtle ripple of self-doubt that only truth can trigger in the powerful. She leaned in, trying to recover. You know what, Mr. Washington? If you think you can come in here and defame public servants without consequences, you've got another thing coming. Her voice shook, not enough for most to notice. But Denzel heard it, felt it, and that's when the room exploded. Not with noise, but with tension. Because by the time the session ended, Bondi's team had already begun preparing a lawsuit, $100 million, filed under defamation with malicious intent. And the country? It didn't care about court documents. Not yet. It only saw the headline that flashed across every screen before noon. Pam Bondi sues Denzel Washington for $100 million after explosive Capitol hearing. But what they didn't know, what no one in that chamber had fully understood, was this. Denzel had planned for that move. Because the lawsuit wasn't the climax, it was just the opening scene. It wasn't the words. It was the silence after them. The kind of silence that descends only when the air has been sliced open by something sharper than accusation. Truth. Truth that doesn't knock. It kicks the damn door in. Denzel stood still, his hand resting on a stack of documents like it was a holy text. He didn't move, didn't blink. Only his voice moved, and it didn't rise above conversational. But in that room, every syllable felt like a match tossed into a field of dry grass. "I'm not here to indict anyone," he said, eyes scanning the panel. "But I do have questions. Questions that, frankly, should have been asked a long time ago." He picked up the first page from the stack. The hearing room screen behind him lit up. Slide 1. A clean time-stamped email from a legal firm in Florida to a nonprofit organization registered in Delaware. The subject line was simple. Legal counsel secured. Bondi Group confirmed. The room froze. "This nonprofit," Denzel continued, "the Edison Foundation, received $52 million in federal COVID relief funds within 3 weeks of registration. No prior history, no track record. But someone signed off on their legal compliance. Someone with connections. Someone who used to be the Attorney General of Florida." The next slide clicked in. Slide 2. A scanned document. A letterhead from Bondi Legal Advisory, dated exactly 14 days before a $10.5 million transfer was made to an offshore account in the Bahamas. This transfer, Denzel tapped the screen, went to a company that doesn't exist on any SEC filings, IRS databases, or even LinkedIn. But it does exist in leaked files from the Paradise Papers. A ripple went through the gallery. Reporters exchanged glances. Phones started vibrating. Bondi shifted, crossed her legs, but her eyes betrayed the tremble. "Again," Denzel said, calm and exact, "I'm not accusing anyone of wrongdoing. I'm simply asking, why would a newly formed charity, with zero operational activity, move federal money into an offshore account just 2 weeks after receiving legal clearance, bearing your signature, Ms. Bondi?" You could feel it. The air broke, not loudly, not with shouting, with the collective gasp of realization, the kind that turns whispers into roars in every newsroom from New York to Phoenix. Bondi's face tightened, her jaw clenched. She slammed her hand on the desk and barked into the microphone. "This is a damn circus. I'm not going to sit here and be slandered by a celebrity playing whistleblower." But Denzel didn't move. "This isn't slander. This is documentation." He pulled out another file. Slide 3. A testimony, anonymous but signed, from a former junior analyst inside the Edison Foundation. "We were told to scrub all records after money moved. They said it was routine compliance. But we knew something was off. The firm said not to worry. We had elite protection." One name kept coming up. Bondi. Pam Bondi stood up, red-faced. "You just made a mistake, Mr. Washington. You think this is noble? You're going to regret this." He turned to her, eyes unwavering. "Maybe, but I'd rather live with regret than sleep beside silence." And then she said the words everyone was waiting for. "I'll see you in court." Those 6 words echoed louder than a gavel, because they didn't just threaten, they activated. The next morning at precisely 8:42 a.m., a statement was released by Bondi's legal team. We have filed a defamation lawsuit in the U.S. District Court against Mr. Denzel Washington, seeking $100 million in damages for libel, slander, and reputational harm. The headline broke every major network by noon, but that wasn't the story. The real story. That lawsuit was never meant to win. It was meant to silence. But Bondi underestimated something. Denzel had been preparing this battle for months. In fact, he had been waiting for her to sue. Because now, all the evidence? It wasn't just a hearing matter anymore. It was public record, admissible, discoverable, unstoppable. And the question hanging in the air, one that even the lawsuit couldn't suppress, was no longer about whether Denzel Washington had crossed a line. It was, how many lines had they already erased before he showed up? They say courtrooms are sacred. That justice wears a blindfold so it won't judge you before hearing your voice. But that morning, when Denzel Washington stepped into the federal courthouse in D.C., there was no doubt. The room had already chosen sides. Polished shoes, tailored suits, hushed murmurs in Latin-engraved hallways. Everything about that space reeked of hierarchy. He wasn't escorted in. He didn't arrive in a motorcade, no entourage, no PR handler, just him, and a single leather-bound folder, worn at the edges, packed with annotated documents, names underlined in red, dates double-checked, and faith. Faith that truth might still count for something in a building designed to bury it politely. At the far table sat Bondi, pristine and pearl white, guarded by a wall of 5 attorneys, each with Ivy League teeth and a glint in their eye that said, "We don't lose to actors." The judge entered. The crowd rose. The room felt like a set. But this time no one was playing pretend. Opening statements began with calculated venom. Bondi's lead attorney, a silver-haired legend named Lyle Whitaker, paced before the jury like a conductor warming up an orchestra of outrage. This case is not about politics. It's about reputation. My client's name, a name built over decades of public service, was dragged through the mud by a man who leveraged his celebrity status to ignite a media firestorm, with falsehoods, with recklessness, with intent. He turned, pointed directly at Denzel. "Mr. Washington may be revered in cinema, but this isn't a movie. This is real, and we're here to make it right." Gasp from the gallery. A few raised eyebrows. Theatrics. But it landed. Now it was Denzel's turn. He stood slowly. No theatrics, no pacing. Just presence. Still, grounded, anchored by something deeper than ego. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I won't waste this court's time with drama. I'm not here to defend a film. I'm here to defend why I said what I said, because I believe it was true. And if speaking the truth in a broken system causes damage, maybe it's the system that needs to apologize." A stir, subtle, but real. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution paraded experts, finance analysts, character witnesses for Bondi. They painted her as a tireless public servant, maligned unfairly. Denzel? He was cast as the outsider, the disruptor, the man too bold for his own good. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Whitaker leaned over the table, looked Denzel in the eye, and asked flatly, "Are you willing to retract your statement? Apologize. Admit that what you said about Ms. Bondi, suggesting criminal implication, was exaggerated and possibly mistaken?" Silence. Denzel didn't blink, didn't shuffle his papers. He took a breath. Slow, like someone exhaling not fear, but resolve. "Apologize for telling the truth?" He stepped forward slightly, his voice never rising, but cutting through every inch of marble in the room. "You're asking me to surrender my conscience, to trade in the lived experience of an entire community for the comfort of a courtroom. No, sir, I won't apologize. I'd rather go bankrupt with a clean heart than get rich off silence." Even the stenographer paused, fingers hovering. Bondi's jaw clenched. Her attorneys exchanged glances. Because that answer, it wasn't just defiant, it was radioactive. Every camera picked it up. Every channel replayed it. And within minutes, the quote was viral. "I'd rather go bankrupt with a clean heart than get rich off silence." Outside, the protests began. Quietly at first, a few signs, a few chants, but it spread. Black veterans, teachers, nurses, families with children, people who had never met Denzel but knew exactly what he meant. They gathered not for celebrity, but for something far rarer, moral clarity. Inside, the court had to proceed, but something had shifted. The lawsuit, once a weapon to crush him, now looked like a monument to fragility. And as the judge called for recess, Denzel sat quietly, unfazed, his hand resting again on that weathered folder, like a soldier sitting beside his rifle. Because this wasn't just about proving innocence anymore. It was about defining courage in a time when truth costs more than silence. The suit was pressed, the lipstick flawless, the posture unshaken. On the outside, Pam Bondi still looked like the woman who had spent 2 decades perfecting the image of invincibility. The decorated prosecutor, the media darling, the unbreakable blonde in the room full of men. But image was no longer armor, and truth had just found a voice sharp enough to cut through silk. As Denzel quietly sipped water from a paper cup on the defense table, the courtroom's mood had shifted. Gone were the opening day whispers about celebrity and ego. Now there was something different in the air, heavier, like smoke after the first flicker of fire. Outside, the press had turned rabid. News outlets from coast to coast picked up an anonymous document leak connecting one of the nonprofits Bondi had previously consulted to a series of whistleblower hush payments. Discrete transfers totaling over $400,000 routed through shell accounts in the Caymans. The headline on CNN was merciless: charity or cover-up, Pam Bondi's financial ties under scrutiny. And the courthouse felt it. The whispers had returned. This time not about Denzel, but about her. Still, no one expected what happened next. The judge called a surprise recess mid-morning. The prosecution looked puzzled. Bondi's legal team huddled, whispering nervously. Then, just before proceedings resumed, a door creaked open behind the witness box. A clerk escorted someone in, late 30s, nervous, pale, holding a small black folder like it was radioactive. The judge tapped the gavel. The court will now hear from a new witness, Ms. Dana Rowe, former Assistant Director of Internal Compliance at Global Renewal Trust, one of the organizations reviewed in this case. Bondi's face went stone cold. Denzel leaned back slightly. He didn't blink. He knew this moment. The pause before truth is spoken aloud for the first time. It always starts in a whisper. Dana adjusted the mic. Her voice cracked at first. I worked under the team that handled legal coordination and discretionary payments. We were told what to move, when to move it, and who not to ask about. She swallowed hard. The email, the memos, they all passed through legal, through Bondi's office. She wasn't just a consultant. She was part of the approval chain. Whitaker, Bondi's lead attorney, objected immediately. Hearsay, no admissible documents. This is character assassination. But the judge waved it off. The witness was under oath, and the room, holding its breath. Dana reached into her folder and handed over a printout. It was a memo with one subject line: urgent, contain exposure from internal complaint, payment approved, legal cover, PB. Gasps. Audible this time. She knew, Dana said, eyes red now. They all knew, and they counted on no one speaking because who the hell would take on someone like her? Right? Her voice broke on that last word. Denzel didn't stand, didn't speak. He simply turned toward her, placed one hand gently over his chest, right above his heart, and bowed his head. The room went silent again, but not out of confusion. It was reverence. That gesture, quiet, human, devastating, was Denzel's only response. He didn't need to gloat. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there because some truths don't need to be shouted. They just need a space brave enough to hold them. Bondi looked like someone sinking, not screaming. Her face frozen, her eyes blinking fast like she was recalculating the odds of survival in real time. Even her lawyers looked rattled. Not because they had lost yet, but because the courtroom had changed sides, and it was irreversible. What once looked like strategy now looked like shame. What once passed as authority now looked like fraud dressed in litigation. The judge called recess. The moment the gavel hit, the courtroom erupted. Not in chaos, but in a wave of hushed astonishment. Dana was escorted out through the back for safety. Bondi stormed into a side chamber with her lawyers. And Denzel? He stood quietly, eyes closed for a second, then opened them, as if allowing the weight of the day to pass through him and settle somewhere behind his ribs. This wasn't vindication. It was just the truth, finally spoken aloud. And outside, as crowds pressed against the courthouse railings, one sign rose above the rest. A white cardboard rectangle with 6 black words that now felt like prophecy. She knew, and he stood anyway. It didn't come with sirens or headlines. No explosive press release. No shaky podium announcement. No per the advice of counsel. Just a quiet footnote on the federal court's digital docket, filed at sunrise and time-stamped with clinical precision. Motion to voluntarily dismiss civil case number 24-CV-9910, Bondi v. Washington. Pam Bondi had pulled the plug. No fanfare, no explanation, just silence. But the silence screamed, because everyone in America knew what that withdrawal meant. It wasn't mercy, it wasn't reconciliation, it was survival. Bondi didn't retreat because she forgave. She retreated because she was cornered. Her empire of plausible deniability had collapsed under the weight of a single witness and one man's unwillingness to flinch. This wasn't a loss. This was a surrender, without honor, without eye contact, without grace. And for Denzel Washington, that was enough. He didn't need her apology. He never asked for a settlement. He hadn't fought to win. He had fought to stand. As news broke of the dismissal, major outlets went into overdrive. CNN's headline was blunt. Bondi backs down. $100 million lawsuit against Denzel Washington dropped without explanation. MSNBC called it a moral pivot point in modern American justice. And Fox News, cornered into neutrality, simply said, case ends. Nation watches. But while media figures debated strategy, intention, and PR fallout, the rest of the country turned their eyes somewhere else, to the man who never raised his voice, yet shook an entire institution. In cities across the country, vigils were held not in protest, but in gratitude. Candles lit on courthouse steps, letters handwritten by teachers, postal workers, veterans, kids. Social media wasn't trending hashtags, it was quoting one sentence, echoing like gospel across all corners of the internet. I'd rather go bankrupt with a clean heart than get rich off silence. And that line didn't just land, it lingered. It carved itself into timelines, into murals, into conversations between fathers and sons, into classroom discussions about courage. Because America, exhausted by cynicism, deafened by spin, finally recognized something rare, an uncompromised soul. Civil rights groups issued official thank you letters. Churches added his name to Sunday prayers. A coalition of black law students at Howard University launched a scholarship in his name. But Denzel didn't bask in it. When asked for a press conference, he declined. When offered a speaking tour, he refused. When Oprah's team called, he didn't even answer. He wasn't building a brand. He was guarding a principle. But the attention found him anyway. 3 nights after the case was dismissed, he sat across from a soft-spoken anchor in a quiet, dim-lit studio. No audience, just 2 chairs, 1 camera, and a question. "Mr. Washington," the anchor asked gently, "there's talk, very serious talk, about you running for Senate in your home state. You're polling higher than some sitting politicians. Would you consider it?" Denzel sat back. He didn't smile. He didn't posture. He simply breathed. And then, in the same voice that once shook a courtroom without raising a decibel, he said, "I don't need a seat to stand. I don't need power to tell the truth. And I don't need permission to care." He leaned forward. "I'm not interested in collecting titles. I'm interested in making silence uncomfortable. If that's enough to make change, then I've already won." The studio fell still. The anchor didn't speak for a full 10 seconds. The moment aired unedited, uncut, unscripted, and millions watched it live. That clip would go on to be studied in classrooms, played in boardrooms, memed, tattooed, quoted by activists and elders, by preachers and poets. But none of it changed him. Because while the world saw a symbol, Denzel still saw a wound, a country stitched together by compromise and silence. And he knew, the job isn't finished. The story isn't over. That night, he wrote a private note. No one knew it existed until months later. It was addressed to every person who ever thought their voice was too small. The last line read, "If you can't shake the room, stand in it anyway, and let your presence shame the silence." He signed it with one word, not his name, just still. He didn't come out with a victory speech. There was no fist in the air, no crowd surfing, no reporters scrambling for sound bites. Denzel Washington stepped through the heavy doors of the courthouse, and for the first time in weeks, the cameras didn't blind him. They weren't even there. He had made it clear he wasn't the story. What mattered had already been said, or rather, shown. The sun was dipping low, slicing the sky into orange and brass, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. And in that half-light, he walked through the crowd not like a victor, but like a man who had survived something sacred. There were people waiting, not as fans, not as followers, but as witnesses, quiet, still, watching him the way one watches a candle stay lit in the wind. No chants, no hashtags, just presence. An elderly woman with silver braids clutched a folded Bible. A teenage boy held up a cardboard sign that read, "Tell the truth, stand tall." One man whispered, "That's him." Another, near tears, simply said, "He didn't bend." Denzel kept his eyes forward, but he saw them. He felt them. The weight of their silence was heavier than any thunderous applause, because these weren't spectators. These were people who had lived their whole lives wondering if anyone would ever dare to speak aloud what they had swallowed for decades. He had done that, not for applause, not for fame, for oxygen, because truth, in a world buried beneath spin and spectacle, had started to suffocate, and someone had to open a window. Inside, the courtroom was already empty. Bondi had slipped out hours earlier, through a side exit, head low, surrounded by lawyers trying to spin her exit as strategic, but the public knew better. You don't quietly drop a $100 million lawsuit unless you're trying to close the curtain before the final act ruins you. And as Denzel walked, no security detail, no entourage, just the rhythm of his own steps, he passed a young girl, no older than 8, holding her father's hand. She looked up and asked him softly, "Did you win?" He stopped, turned, looked her straight in the eyes, not with grandiosity, not with pretense, but with the same unwavering calm that had dismantled a system built on deflection. "I told the truth," he said. "That's the only kind of winning I believe in." The father nodded. The little girl squeezed his hand tighter, and Denzel walked on. That night, the nation exhaled. Not because a celebrity had beaten a politician, but because someone had reminded them that truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to stand beside it. Cable news ran montages. Social media clipped his quotes. Editorials spilled over with analysis. But what echoed most wasn't a headline, or even a sentence. It was the feeling he left behind, like someone had finally cracked a window in a house full of smoke. One channel aired a montage of his walk out of the courthouse. No narration, no score, just raw footage of him moving through the silent crowd, every face around him marked by some private grief suddenly seen. As the clip ended, a final line faded in, white over black. "In a world where truth is auctioned and silence is the highest bidder, there are still those who refuse to sell out." But the most unforgettable moment came later that week, during a university Q&A session. A student, trembling with emotion, stood and asked, "Mr. Washington, with everything you've faced and everything you've risked, would you do it again?" Denzel looked at him. No hesitation. "Every time, because if I don't, then I'm just one more man letting silence win." He paused. "And silence doesn't deserve to win." That answer shattered the room. Professors stood to clap. Students wept. Not because he was brilliant, but because he was unbreakable. Not in strength, but in clarity. He had become a mirror, not just for the system, but for every person who had ever doubted their voice mattered. And as the crowd dispersed that day, both in real life and across the country, There was no confusion about who had truly walked out of that courtroom victorious. Not the one who filed the lawsuit, not the one who dropped it, but the one who stood in its fire and never looked away. Narration over closing shot. In a world where truth is taken to trial and integrity is put on the stand, sometimes justice does not come from verdicts or verdicts overturned. Sometimes justice comes in the form of a man walking through a crowd saying nothing, because his truth has already spoken for him. And in that silence, justice doesn't need to wear a mask. It just needs to be seen. In the courtroom of life, not all battles are won with verdicts. Some are won in the quiet refusal to betray what is right. Denzel's journey reminds us that integrity isn't loud, it's steady. That speaking the truth may cost you comfort, reputation, even peace, but it grants something far more enduring: the power to look in the mirror without shame. We are not measured by what we silence, but by what we're brave enough to say. And sometimes, standing alone for the truth is the most powerful way to walk beside others in their silence. If this story stirred something in you, don't scroll past it. Hit like, share it with someone who still believes in accountability, and subscribe to Justice Unscripted, where no truth is scripted and no silence is left unchallenged. Turn on the bell, because the next chapter isn't polished, it's raw, and it might just change how you see power forever. Now tell us, what truth hit you hardest in this story? Drop it in the comments. Let's not forget. Let's not look away. Let's face it. Together. This dramatized story is rooted in real injustices and real courage. It's not made to entertain, it's made to awaken. Thanks for watching. And remember, justice isn't written by winners. It's written by those who refuse to stay quiet. This is Justice Unscripted.